Hello and welcome to this DDI CADcast. My name is Cody Armstrong, and the topic for today is SOLIDWORKS costing. Now this is a continuation of our SOLIDWORKS What's New 2013 series of CADcasts, and like I mentioned, today I'd like to get into some of the enhancements for SOLIDWORKS costing in the 2013 release. Now costing is not new for SOLIDWORKS 2013. In fact, it was new in SOLIDWORKS 2012. But like I mentioned, what I'd like to focus on are some of the new features for the 2013 release that make it different. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is jump right into it. Here are a few of the new features for costing in the 2013 release. One of the big ones is support for turn operations. That's the first one I'd like to get into here today. Also support for multi-body parts. And as we get into that, I'd like to point out some different things about support for multi-body parts and analyzing the cost of multi-body parts. Also, we have this new feature we call volume features. Okay, for machining costing, volume features I believe will make a lot more accurate analyzation of the cost of a model. Also, we have a couple new commands, one of them being the ability to convert holes to milled pockets in costing, as well as some enhancements to the user interface that I definitely think are worth pointing out. So like I mentioned, let's jump right into it and start off with support for turn operations. Okay, so I've called up a lathe part, and like I said, what I want to go through are the new features, support for turn features in SOLIDWORKS 2013. Now before I get into support for turn features, there is one little interface change that I'd like to bring up as we're going through this. One thing you'll notice about costing is when you call up costing, in previous versions it was either machining costing or sheet metal costing, and that was the button that you clicked on. Now in the latest version of software it is just costing, right? So when I go to the evaluate tab, you'll see a button that just says costing. It'll look at the model to determine which version it needs to call up, so all you have to do is select costing. Okay. So again, just a little interface tweak that I wanted to point out. No longer does it say machining costing or sheet metal costing, just says costing. So as I call up costing here, again, this is very similar to SOLIDWORKS 2012. It calls up a tab in the task pane, and of course you define your templates, what type of material you'd like, right? So I'll go through and specify material. What's really different, the really big difference is in the stock body definition. When I hit this drop down for stock body, what you'll notice is a new form of stock body called cylinder. This is really how we determine that this is a turned part, right? A lathe part. By defining cylinder as my stock body, it will automatically take the part and look at it using turn operations, right? So I select cylinder. Of course, just like previous versions, I could add to or remove material, right? So if I wanted to add some stock material, I could do it here, or of course I can just grab and pull on it, add material there as well. And of course, all I need to do to get it to update is just click update. Okay. Again, what it's going to do is look at the model based on not just mill features, but turn operations as well. So what you'll see over here on the left-hand side is mill operations and turn operations. Okay. So this is really what's new about the 2013 version of costing, is this turn operation support. ID and OD turn, groove operations, all supported when using the turn operation function, right? And really the big thing there is you need to define cylinder as your stock body type to get turn operations. Another thing that's nice about this is it supports still mill operations. So I have this part that's a combination of lathe and mill operations. It shows me both. So even if I'm on a lathe with live tooling, or if I'm just using a mill as well, it shows me mill operations like this slot, for instance, in the turn operations as well. Okay, you also get a breakdown of the setups, right? So I have 4 different setups showing each of the different operations necessary to make this part. So I have 2 different lathe operations. The reason for this is it sees that it has to be held in 2 different positions to machine the ODs on both of these parts. That's why you see 2 different setup operations. What's nice about this, in a new version, with the new version, you can actually drag an operation from one setup to another. Right? So if I take this OD turn 2 and drag it into the operation 2, it takes it from one operation to another. And that's one of those little user interface enhancements I wanted to point out. but you can actually take operations like that OD turn, and let's say that I'm doing it all in one operation. I can take and drag and drop it into the second operation in this case. And then of course I could eliminate that third operation. If it was no longer needed, I could right click eliminate, and that would adjust the cost accordingly. Okay, so those are a few of the new little enhancements, mainly support for turn operations in SOLIDWORKS Costing 2013. What I'd like to jump into next is support for multi-bodied parts. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring up an example of this. What I'd like to go over is how costing handles multi-body parts. And one thing I want to point out about this is notice this is a combination of sheet metal bodies and regular solid bodies. Right? So I have sheet metal bodies here, I have a couple of regular solid bodies. It does not matter whether I have a combination of both or one or the other. It will work in all those situations. So the way this works is I just call up costing. Right, same way it would in any other manner, but you'll notice the interface is slightly different. I have an option to specify template, but I also have these two templates below that. And the way this works is you have a top level template, then you specify the two templates below that, one for sheet metal, one for machining. Okay, so if I bring this up, I just want to point this out in a little bit more clarity here. The 2013 templates are actually going to consist of two files. So first off, I want to make sure my templates are right. Right, so I'll set my templates. But you'll notice I have a sheet metal template and a machining template in the top level. Okay, so there's my sheet metal, there's my machining template, and again, this template contains both of these. Right, so it has both of these files. Also notice that we have an SLD-CTC, and then inside of that you'll have an SLD-CTS and SLD-CTM. These are just the different extensions for the different types of templates we have in multi-body costing. Okay, but the big thing there is the top level template will have two templates inside of it, one for sheet metal, one for costing. So that's one change for 2013. Okay, now the way this works is when you have a multi-body part, you're going to get a list of bodies, right? And so you'll see there it's found that that's a sheet metal body. And then what I have to do is I have to go through and define what type of bodies these are. Right, so that one's already done, the material's defined. I select the next one, and you'll see specify body type. Okay, I can select the drop down. I can say, okay, this is a machined part. Okay, then I go through and specify materials, and then it incorporates that into my analysis. Right, so I'll change this material, and now that's defined. I'll go to the next one on the list. I'll define this one as machined. Right? We'll say, okay, it's this material. But really what I'm doing is defining a material for each. Now I can also exclude these bodies. So if I wanted to ignore it from the analysis, I can highlight the body and hit exclude. Right? And that'll exclude it from the analysis, just ignore it altogether. But in my case, I want to include it. Now the other option I want to point out is this custom option here. And basically what this does is allows me just to assign a cost to this body. Right, it's not going to analyze it, it's just giving it a blanket cost. I'm typing in whatever the cost is for this particular body. So it is a little bit different. You're really not analyzing it, it's just giving it a value. But I'm going to set this back to machined. We'll go ahead and give it aluminum alloy. And now once I have all this defined, all I have to do is hit this begin cost estimation. And you'll see the message turns green, letting you know it's ready to begin. Right? And really all I have to do is hit begin cost estimation to start. And what you'll notice about this is it launches a window and it analyzes one body at a time. So you'll see a little scroll bar there telling me how far it's gotten along, and when it's done it's going to give me a cost per part. Okay? Now this is for the entire part, all bodies of it. Now the way this works is on the left hand side you're going to get broken down into a series of folders. You're going to have sheet metal bodies and machined bodies. Right? It's going to break down each of the different bodies to its own operations. Now if I want to look at one individually, all I have to do is double click that body. Okay, if I double click that body, it takes me into a single body mode where I can look at all the features associated with just that one body. Right, so here you'll see all the edge bins, all the different setups, the laser profile that it has to cut. But again, this is specific to this one body. Now to go back, I have to hit this button here that says back to multi-body environment. And this is how I return back to the environment I was just in a moment ago, where I can see all the bodies in this part. Okay, so again, to be able to analyze a single body, you have to double click that body from the folder, the necessary folder, right? So I double click the body. That takes me into a single body mode where I can view the costs, the setup, the operations associated with a specific body. And again, make sure to go back to multi-body environment, that little arrow, back to multi-body environment to get back to the regular multi-body mode. So that's an example of multi-body parts and SOLIDWORKS costing, and the 2013 enhancement, of course, support for multi-body parts and costing. What I'd like to jump into next is a new feature for machining costing we call volume features. And so what I'd like to do is jump into an example of this just to kind of show you it. And so here's kind of an example of a part that in previous versions of the software, a lot of it would be missing. And what I mean by that is costing is very good at picking up holes and things like that, but it doesn't pick up every feature necessarily. Right, so when we define a block, a stock by block like this, you'll see much of the part is being machined away. But what you'd find in previous versions is you would find these holes, right? You'd find the holes that I've highlighted here, but it wouldn't find a lot of the material that just needed to be machined away, like the corner of this part here, right? It would not find that as a feature because it's not a pocket, it's not a hole, it's not a slot, it's not any of those things. So what you'll find is a new feature called volume in machined parts. And basically what volume is it looks at all the things it's found. It looks at all the holes, the slots, the pockets. And then it looks at anything that it did not find. Right? So it looks at the model, looks at the stock, and takes the two and subtracts one from another and says, okay, here's all the features that aren't associated with something else, and it adds them all together as a volume feature. Okay? Now, what's nice about this is you can change what tool you're using to do this volume feature with. So if I change the diameter of this tool, of course it'll be done faster, which means the cost will go down, right? So I select that diameter tool, and of course that affects the cost of this volume feature. But really all it does is it looks at the amount of cubic material that needs to be removed from the part, and it gives an approximate cost to remove that material. That's kind of the basics of a volume feature. And it's all based on the things that it did not pick up anywhere else. Right? So anything that it did not pick up as a whole pocket slot, whatever it was, it will be picked up as a volume feature. Right? And so this is just going to give me a little bit more accurate idea of the cost of a machined part because it's actually looking at the entire part and not just the features it can specifically recognize. Now another thing I want to point out is this enhancement to holes. If you right click a hole, you'll now have an option to change to mill. And what this means is a hole that's picked up as a hole by default can now be changed to a pocket by the right-click change to mill function. Okay? So now it's no longer in the holes. You'll find it in the no cost assigned as a pocket, but it's now defined as a pocket feature, a milled feature. Right? So you can right-click, change to mill. Okay? So those are a few of the new enhancements. The big one being support for volume features in machining costing. Now, one last thing I want to point out about this, and it's kind of nice, is if I've changed a feature to mill, right? For instance, I just changed that hole to a mill feature, you can go back and change it back to drill. So if you did it mistakenly, I can go back and find that feature, right? So here it is here, this circular pocket. I can right-click on it and say change to drill. That'll add it back to the list of hole operations and essentially set me right back to where I was. So the last thing I'd like to go over is a few enhancements to the user interface for costing in SOLIDWORKS 2013. And basically what we've tried to do is create a common interface, a common set of commands that the user that's familiar with SOLIDWORKS would be able to use in costing as well. So there are little simple things. There were always limitations in costing. An example of this would be a collapse all function. In SOLIDWORKS I can right click collapse all and it collapses all the features. Well, now you can do the same thing in the costing manager in SOLIDWORKS, right? So if I right click a setup, you'll see an option to collapse all, right? This is one of those little interface changes that just simplifies the process. You don't have to go through and minimize one at a time. I can right click collapse all, and of course it collapses the individual setups. So the collapse all function is just an enhancement trying to make it very similar to what a SOLIDWORKS user is familiar with. Now we also added support for control selecting. Right, so I can now control select multiple features or operations. Right, so if I control select these two flat end mills, I can apply a cost override to both of them. But what I want to point out here is just the ability to control select multiple things. Control or shift select is now supported in costing. Again, it was always a big limitation in previous versions. So those are some of the new features for costing in 2013. Please feel free to visit us at www.ddicad.com.